today that many of the participants we have in the room here also were part of the implementation of the Foster program. So I also worked on the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. I was EITI country manager for Anglophone Africa. EITI is the global standard for transparency in the extractives. So issues around subsidy is also one of the key focal points of EITI. So there's no surprise to you that Center for Transparency and Accountability has invited me today to speak on this issue. And also to choose that topic of how important transparency and accountability is in the discussion and deliberations we're having as a nation right now. So my role is to attempt to set a brief background to the discussions that we will be having shortly. Today's event presents yet another platform for stakeholders to engage in constructive dialogue and develop practical recommendations to address the challenges thrown up by the big bang subsidy removal policy of the new government led by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. This is a no mean task, particularly considering that the new policy is yet to be fully accepted by Nigerians, and in fact, it is still being opposed or contested by some critical stakeholders. Following the new government's decision, pump price of the premium motor spirit PMS jumped from about 197 in late May to 617 in July 2023. There are speculations that it would go higher in a matter of weeks or even days. This is because the global price of gasoline continues to soar. Government's decision to overlook scheduled and gradual removal of subsidy and rather opt for an abrupt and total removal has triggered a chain of consequences, including the socio-economic pressures that it mounts on poor people, especially the estimated 143 million people living in multi-dimensional poverty. This estimate is according to Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. On the streets, in the markets and other places, among workers and business owners, reactions range from despondency, anguish, and to anger. And I appreciate our sister here who shared earlier about the very pathetic story of how a man killed his wife just because of 100 naira. The rising harsh conditions and government's delay in developing, communicating, and implementing a clear strategy for alleviating the impact of subsidy removal have endangered a tense atmosphere which pervades the entire country. Despite its unpalatable consequences, many stakeholders argued that fuel subsidy removal was long overdue. I think this was acknowledged by the president of IPMA here during his goodwill message. Successive governments since 1999 have attempted to remove fuel subsidy without success. Each attempt was met with strong resistance from the masses. The huge financial burden that the subsidy regime imposed on the growth of the Nigerian economy over the years is often cited as a major justification for its removal. There is mounting evidence that subsidy payments exert enormous strain on government revenues, and this is not just about Nigeria, it's global. A study conducted in 2018 across Latin America and Caribbean countries found that it cost an average of $12 to transfer $1 of income to households in the poorest quintile. The cost may be higher in the case of Nigeria. According to native oil and gas industry reports, Nigeria spent 13.7 trillion, that's 74.3862 billion as subsidy payments in the period from 2005 to 2021. This amount is equivalent to the combined budgets of health, education, agriculture, and defense in the last 5 years. The sum of 4.39 trillion was spent on fuel subsidy in 2022 alone, and President Mohamed Buhari administration allocated 3.6 trillion, which is approximately 18% of the total budget, to fund subsidy in the first 6 months of 2023 alone. In addition to the debilitating impact on government revenues, there is a long list of arguments, countries such as Nigeria, to remove fuel subsidy. It is indeed astonishing that the subsidy regime lingered for as long as it did. However, there is little or no dispute that the subsidy regime was unsustainable and should be stopped. The debate over when, how, and other measures that should accompany its removal were never resolved. The Buhari administration might have hinted on the when by making budgetary provisions for subsidy payments only for up to June 2023. The new government took the decision to end the subsidy regime 1 month earlier than that. This decision and the manner of its implementation has no doubt imposed some pains and burden on the masses, especially the poor and vulnerable. And I think this is what will form the core of our discussion today. Expectedly, the strategic imperative of government presently is how to cushion the socio-economic effects of fuel subsidy removal on citizens. However, there is a concern that the fundamental problems that underlie the failure of the subsidy regime in Nigeria may yet be ignored. Fuel subsidy failed to achieve its intended outcome in Nigeria because its administration was flawed and characterized by lack of transparency, mismanagement, and corruption. It is important to recognize that the essence of fuel subsidy removal is not to make more revenue available to government, which will be subjected to the same systemic inefficiency and that drained government revenues and denied the poor the full benefits of fuel subsidy. There are many layers of entrenched inefficiency in Nigeria's political economy. Most of these layers can be linked to the endemic lack of transparency and accountability in our public institutions. My opinion is that government should prioritize strengthening transparency and public engagement now more than ever before. Therefore, I would like to suggest the following 6 poses for consideration in our deliberations today. 1. Will PMS consumption in the country be demystified? Many stakeholders do not believe that the total consumption figures often quoted by NNPC Limited and its partners, and Ipman is here, on which basis subsidy payments were made in the past are indeed correct. The figure has been quoted to be as high as 68 million liters per day. The Nigerian Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, NEITI, shares the same concern about the bogus consumption figures and is currently seeking to conduct a study that could provide a more accurate estimate. The mystery behind petroleum importation should be unraveled without further delay. Public knowledge of the total daily consumption figures would enhance a better understanding of the actual revenue loss due to inefficiency in the subsidy administration system. Number 2, will there be consequences for bad behavior? There seems to be a consensus that the fuel subsidy regime failed due to corruption and inefficiencies in its administration. There should be a concerted effort by government and sustained demand from accountability actors for a thorough review of the system, with punishment and sanctions meted to those found answerable. Without a strong signal on fighting corruption, there is no guarantee that the potential savings from subsidy removal will be safe or appropriately utilized. Government should disclose plans for repositioning critical accountability institutions for improved performance and delivery of their mandates. Number 3, will the system reduce cost of governance? Government at all levels and all tiers will need to considerably reduce the cost of governance. The sacrifice required to salvage the country's struggling economy cannot be made only by the poor and vulnerable. The annual salary and benefits of a Nigerian senator come to about 350 million naira, while those of a minimum wage earner are less than 400,000 naira. The Oronsaye report recommended merging and scrapping of some parastatals and agencies to reduce their burden on scarce government revenue. There is no better time to implement the recommendations of the report than now. Government should clearly demonstrate sincerity, sensitivity, and commitment in order to earn the trust of citizens. Nigerians are skeptical and suspicious of the real intentions of government, and this is based on the experience from past administrations. Number 5, will there be an inclusively and transparently developed broad-based plan on how the savings from subsidy removal will be utilized in the short to medium term? Government should carry out widespread stakeholders and public consultations, engagements, and enlightenment for the purpose of developing a plan for the utilization of the savings from fuel subsidy, and on its strategy for cushioning the impact of subsidy removal. The plan should include a robust accountability framework that enables public monitoring and scrutiny. Number 6, and the last one, will the relief plan or strategy be targeted and based on accurate data? What is often stated as a number of multidimensional poor people in Nigeria may have significantly changed from the day that subsidy removal was announced, and may continue to change as the impact of high costs of PMS continues to exacerbate. It is important to determine the rate at which this change in the poor and vulnerable groups occurs, and to further stratify the group, possibly in quintiles. The level of vulnerability of each quintile or category of the poor in Nigeria to fuel price hikes differs, and each quintile would require specific approaches or policies for alleviating the impact of subsidy removal. It is incorrect to assume that the poor in Nigeria is a homogeneous group of nations today. So I would like to conclude this: of every crisis lies great opportunity. Subsidy removal seems to have raised the consciousness of Nigerians to a level comparable to that of pre-2023 general elections period. Can the current level of consciousness of Nigerians present an opportunity for accountability actors to push for disruptive and transformational changes in the patterns of public engagement on critical policy issues? Subsidy removal can play a similar role as taxation in strengthening the physical social contract between the government and its citizens. There is the potential that a high level of citizens' consciousness created by subsidy removal can trigger increased public demand for transparency and accountability, if properly harnessed. Thank you very much for listening.